A pleasant morning to everyone. We are here to give you some information about life and works of Donatello and Michelangelo and also the end of Renaissance. But before anything else, I would like you all to meet all my members in this group. Now, let's talk about Donatello.
Good day everyone! Let me introduce to you to the man in the picture. His name is Donato di Niccolo di Beto Bardi, but he was well known as Donatello. Donatello was born in Florence in the year 1386. Walang specific month and date nga ang naitala. Well, he died on December 13, 1466, also in Florence. Donatello was considered as one of the greatest Italian Renaissance artists and also one of the most influential dahil siya ang nagpasimula ng nude sculpture in the classical antiquity. Antiquity means ancient past or period before Middle Ages. He is the son of Niccolo di Beto Bardi, member ng Florentine Wool Combers Guild ang kanyang ama. At base nga sa aming research ay walang naging anak at asawa si Donatello. Now let's talk about his educational background. Donatello was educated in the house of the Martelli family, a family of wealthy and influential art patrons and bankers, closely tied to the Medici family. Dito niya nga din unang na-receive ang kanyang artistic training from a goldsmith workshop. Ang goldsmith workshop ay ang pag-create ng jewelry and any other objects out of gold. Early works of Donatello. In 1403, naging member siya ng workshop ni Lorenzo Ghiberti. Si Ghiberti was well known for his international Gothic style of bronze sculpture na na-adapt sa kanya ni Donatello. Inassist nga din ni Donatello si Ghiberti sa paggawa ng cathedral doors in the baptistry of Florence Cathedral. At ang unfinished works naman ni Donatello is the pulpits. He was unable to finish it because namatay na siya nung panahon na yon. Now let's talk about the David, his greatest masterpiece. We all know that the David is a biblical hero. It was produced in the 1440s in a bronze statue. Ito ay kinoconsider bilang greatest sculptural works of the early Renaissance. Fully nude kasi ang sculpture apart sa ulo nito na natatakpan ng hat at sa paa naman nito na natatakpan ng boots. Ito din daw ang kauna-unahang freestanding nude male sculpture made since antiquity. Now let's briefly discuss some of his famous works. Ang una na nga dyan is the Feast of Herod. Ito ang earliest and first relief sculpture na ginawa ni Donatello. Ano ba pag sinabi nating relief sculpture? Ito ay ang pag-curve sa wall and any other background surfaces. Ang Feast of Herod ay isa sa series sa Bible kung saan pinagutan ng ulo si John the Baptist bilang hiling ni Salome na anak ni King Herod. Second is the Saint Mark. Ito ay isang marble statue na ginamitan ni Donatello ng distortion kung saan pinahaba niya ang torso at neck nito. Judith and Holofernes naman ay isang bronze sculpture. Ito naman ay in-sculptured at the end of his career na. Lastly is the Saint George killing the dragon. Ito ay isang marble sculpture na nakikita natin sa external niches of the San Michel Church. Ito naman ay kinamitan ni Donatello ng technique na sashato or what we call flatten out sa English or ang pagka-curve ng sobrang shallow lang para mag-create ng illusion of space sa mga taong makakakita nito.
Penitent Magdalene, a wooden statue produced by Donatello in 1453 to 1455. It was commissioned for the baptistry of Florence. Gawa ito sa white poplar wood. Ito ay naging kilala dahil sa unprecedented release. Pagkakataong ito, mas naintindihan ni Donatello ang anatomy of the body at kung paano mag-portray ng body with perfect proportion. Makikita natin yung sculpture ni Magdalene, siya ay payat at mahaba ang buhok because Magdalene spent 30 years repenting in the desert without food or clothing. Based on my research, ginawa niya ito para pagsisihan ng kanyang mga kasalanan. And by the way, Magdalene is a biblical figure na kung saan siya ay makadiyos and at the same time ay makasalanan rin. Sa kasalukuyan ay matatagpuan ang sculpture ni Magdalene sa Museo dell'Opera del Duomo sa Florence. Equestrian statue of Catamelata, 1453. It was a bronze statue depicting one of the most famous leaders during 15th century Venice. Ipinatawag si Donatello sa Padua ng mga tagapagmana ng kondusyero, Erasmo da Narni o Catamelata o mas kilalang Hanikat, pero walang specific reason kung bakit ito nakilalang Hanikat. And natapos ito noong 1453 at it was the greatest artistic works in Padua. And it was the first example of equestrian statue since ancient times. Works for Saint Anthony of Padua. It was dedicated to the memory of saint and the group called Altar del Santo, which Donatello executed for about 1447 to 50. 1895, nireconstruct ang altar na ito at ganun pa rin, wala pa rin nakakaalam ng original na arrangement nito. And by the way, ito ay binubuo ng 29 pieces of sculpture. Saint George, a marble statue created in 1415 to 1417. It is one of the 14 sculptures commissioned by the guilds of Florence to decorate the external niches of the Orson Michel Church. Ano nga bang meron sa Orson Michel Church? Ito daw ay pinalilibutan ng mga sculpture na kung saan ito daw ay Rennaisance style sculpture at isa na rito si Saint George. Unique daw ang sculpture ni Saint George dahil ito ay hindi, compared kay Saint Mark, ito ay hindi nakapustura na kontraposto at ito lamang ay binabalance ng kanyang dalawang paa na kung saan kanyang kanang paa ay hindi masyadong nakadikit doon sa mismong pinagkakatayuan niya. At dahil nga sa pagiging malikhain ni Donatello ay kung mapapansin niyo sa ibabang bahagi na pinagkakatayuan ni St. George, meron doong nakaukit na isang babae o prinsesa na nakatingin kay St. George habang pinapatay niya ang isang dragon. Zucchini, produced between 1423 to 1425 o mas kilalang pumpkin due to figure's baldness. At alam niyo ba na isa ito sa pinakapaborito ni Donatello sa kanyang mga gawa. At sa katunayan nga habang ginagawa niya ito ay kinakausap niya ito at sinasabi niya na speak, speak na tila ba akala mo'y magsasalita ang isang estatwa. It is also known for its realism and naturalism and also known as Prophet Habakkuk. These are the 10 facts about Donatello.
And now, let's learn more about Michelangelo. On March 6, 1475, Michelangelo di Ludovico Buonarroti Simoni, simply known as Michelangelo, was born in Caprice, a small town in Valtellerina near Arezzo, Tuscany. He is Italian Renaissance sculptor, painter, architect, and poet who exerted an unparalleled influence on the development of Western art. His family had been a small-scale bankers in Florence for several generations, but the bank failed, and his father, Ludovico di Leonardo Buonarroti Simoni, briefly held a government post in Caprice where Michelangelo was born. His father was the town's judicial administrator and podesta or local administrator of Chiusi della Verna at the time of Michelangelo's birth. Michelangelo's mother was Francesca di Neri del Miniato di Siena. Michelangelo's family eventually returned to Florence, where the artist spent much of his childhood. His mother died of a chronic illness in 1481 when he was only 6 years old. The artist traveled to Florence to study grammar with his teacher Francesco de Urbino. He was only vaguely interested in formal education because he was more interested in copying paintings from various churches in Italy. He also had the opportunity to meet several painters who encouraged him to continue his art education. Michelangelo was also considered the greatest living artist in his lifetime. He was most famous on the following works: the fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, which included the iconic depiction of the creation of Adam interpreted from Genesis, are probably the best known of Michelangelo's works today, but the artist thought of himself primarily as a sculptor. Michelangelo was died February 18, 1564 at the age of 88. Here are some of the masterpieces of Michelangelo. First is Bacchus. This statue of Bacchus depicts the Roman god of wine precariously perched on a rock in a state of drunkenness. He wears a wreath of ivy and holds a goblet in one hand, brought up toward his lips for a drink. On the other hand, he holds a lion's skin, which is a symbol of death derived from the myth of Hercules. From behind his left leg peeks a satyr significant to the cult of Bacchus, often representing a drunken, lusty woodland deity. Bacchus is also depicted as a naked man who appears to be entranced with his own creation, and its style of nudity is a combination of both ancient proportion and a style which is much more naturalistic. Next is Pieta. This was the first of a number of Pietas Michelangelo worked on during his lifetime. It depicts the body of Jesus in the lap of his mother after the crucifixion. This particular scene is one of the 7 sorrows of Mary used in Catholic devotional prayers and depicts a key moment in her life foretold by the prophet Simeon. Not only was Pieta the first depiction of the scene in marble, but Michelangelo also moved away from the depiction of the Virgin's suffering, which was usually portrayed in Pietas of the time, instead presenting her with a deep sense of maternal tenderness for her child. Christ too shows little sign of his recent crucifixion, with only slightly discernible small nail marks in his hands and the wound in his side. Rather than a dead Christ, he looks as if he is asleep in the arms of his mother as she waits for him to awake, symbolic of the resurrection. A pyramidal structure signature to the time was also used, Mary's head at the top and then the gradual widening through her layered garments to the base. The draped clothing gives credence to Michelangelo's mastery of marble, as they retain a sense of flowing movement far removed from the typical characteristic of stone. This is the only sculpture that Michelangelo ever signed. The Pieta also became famous immediately following its completion, and it was pivotal in contributing to Michelangelo's fame. Next is David. This 17-foot tall statue depicts the prophet David, majestic and nude, with a slingshot he will use to kill Goliath, slung over one shoulder. The piece was commissioned by the Opera del Duomo for the Cathedral of Florence, a project that was originally meant to be a series of sculptures of prophets for the rooftop. Although David's familiarity stems from the classic religious tale, the statue became not only a rendition of the tale, but a symbol for the new Florentine Republic of its defiant independence from Medici rule. It is also considered one of Michelangelo's great masterpieces. An exquisite example of his knowledge of anatomy can be seen in David's musculature. A sense of naturalism is conveyed in the way the body stands determined, a confident glare on the young man's face. The top half of the body was made slightly larger than the legs, so that the viewers glancing up at it or from afar would experience a more authentic perspective. The creation of Adam. This legendary painting, part of the vast masterpiece that adorns the Sistine Chapel, shows Adam as a muscular classical nude reclining on the left as he extends his hand toward God, who fills the right half of the painting. God rushes toward him, his haste conveyed by his white flaring robe and the energetic movements of his body. God is surrounded by angels and cherubim, all encased within a red cloud, while a feminine figure thought to be Eve or Sophia, symbol of wisdom, peers out with curious interest from underneath God's arm. Behind Adam, the green ledge upon which he lies and the mountainous background create a strong diagonal, emphasizing the division between mortal he and heavenly God. Some have noted that the shape of the red cloud resembles the shape of the human brain, as if the artist meant to imply God's intent to infuse Adam with not merely animate life, but also the important gift of consciousness. This was also an innovative depiction of the creation of Adam. For Michelangelo, it was important to depict the all-powerful giver of life as one distinctly intimate with man, whom he created in his own image. This also reflected the humanist ideals of man's essential place in the world and the connection to the divine.
Moses. This grand epic-sized statue depicts Moses seated regally to guard the tablets written with the Ten Commandments. His expression is stern, reflecting his anger at seeing his people worshipping the golden calf on his return from Mount Sinai. So, ito daw po ay naglalarawan kay Moses na nakaupo ng marangal upang bantayan ang mga tapyas na nakasulat sa 10 utos. Michelangelo's reputation following the sculpture of David reached Pope Julius II in Rome, who commissioned the artist to come and work on his tomb. The ambitious artist initially proposed a project of over 40 figures. The Last Judgment. This fresco covers the entire altar wall of the Sistine Chapel and is one of the last pieces in the seminal building that was commissioned by Pope Clement VII when Michelangelo was 62. In it we see the second coming of Christ as he delivers the Last Judgment. The monumental work took 5 years to complete and consists of over 300 individual figures. The scene is one of hurried action around the central figures of Christ, his hand raised to reveal the wounds of his crucifixion. He looks down upon the souls of humans as they rise to their fates. To his left, the Virgin Mary glanced toward to save, and either aside Christ are John Baptist and Saint Peter holding the keys to heaven.
Renaissance was one of the most exciting periods in the human civilization. It witnessed a great flourishing of arts, literature, philosophy, architecture, and politics. Many of the world's greatest figures in the world civilization appeared in Renaissance period, including Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Machiavelli, and Raphael. Sinasabing ang Renaissance period ay isang kapanapanabik na panahon sa sibilisasyon ng tao. At ilan sa mga pinakamagagaling na artist ay umusbong sa panahon ng Renaissance, kabilang sila Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Machiavelli, at Raphael. What was Renaissance? The term Renaissance is the French word meaning rebirth. The Renaissance started in the late 14th century as Italians sought to imitate the lost world of ancient Greece and Rome and move away from the Gothic art. Ang Renaissance ay isang salitang French na ang ibig sabihin ay rebirth at nagsimula ito noong late 14th century. The Renaissance not only produced great work of arts, but also resulted in a dramatic change in the views of Europeans and the decisive move away from the world of Middle Ages. Sinasabi ang Renaissance ay hindi lamang nagdala ng mga gandang gawang sining at literatura, kundi binago din ito ang pananaw ng mga European at lumayo sa mundo ng Middle Ages. Interesting facts about the Renaissance. The Renaissance began in the 14th century. The Renaissance period transformed society from darkness to light. Humanism was the main philosophy. The Medici family were the major patrons of the movement. The height of the Renaissance was called High Renaissance. When did the Renaissance end? At the end of the 14th century, after the collapse of the Florentine and Roman economies due to the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 caused by the Little Ice Age, disruption of trade by the war between England and France, and the devastation of the Black Plague, Rome and Florence began to rebound. By the 1550s, many of the works of literature and art that helped the birth of the Renaissance were banned. By the mid-1550s, the Renaissance was essentially over. While the Renaissance died in Florence and Rome, its ideas, beliefs, and art had spread across Europe. Pagsapit ng taong 1550s, maraming mga gawang sining at literatura na dahilan kung bakit nagsimula ang Renaissance ang ipinagbawal. The rise of Spain. Over the following decades, Italy became the battleground for the first time in centuries. This was to have a negative impact on the Renaissance in 1527. Eventually, the Spanish under Philip II established Spanish domination in Italy. This resulted in a loss of political and individual freedom, and this dealt a blow to the Renaissance, as increasingly artists and thinkers were unable to express freely their own ideas and opinions. Conclusion. The Renaissance was one of the most important historical epochs. It produced a culture that created great work of arts and provided the world with humanist view of life, which encouraged individual and use of reason. However, economic decline meant that there was less money for the arts and learning. Spanish came to dominate the city-states, and this meant that the artists had less freedom of expression. Finally, the Counter-Reformation by enforcing Catholic. Orthodoxy meant that artists, thinkers, and writers were afraid to be as daring or original as they had been in the past. These factors led to the end of Renaissance. Sa madaling paliwanag, ang Renaissance period ang isa sa pinaka-importanteng panahon ng nakaraan. Subalit sa paghina ng ekonomiya, umunti din ang pondo ng mga artist para sa pag-aaral ng kanilang sining at literatura. At ang pinakahuli, ang Counter-Reformation ng Simbahang Katoliko, na nagresulta sa limitadong kalayaan ng mga artist, thinkers at writers na ipahayag ang kanilang isip at damdamin. At ito ang nagresulta sa tuluyang pagtatapos ng Renaissance. At pagkatapos nito ay dumating naman ang mga Espanyol at sinakop ang mga city-states. Ito ay nagresulta sa pagkakaroon ng limitadong kalayaan ng mga artist sa kanilang mga likhang sining.